Well, it's a Monday. It's the 19th day of January, 2026. If you or a loved one has suffered a tragic crash, get the firm with the most board certified and trucking accident law attorneys. Nationally renowned and located in Wyoming, Colorado, and Montana, call Grant Lawson and the law firm for truck safety. Well, Arctic mayhem going to be developing here in the days ahead across a good part of the nation. And we'll kind of take you through it, as it does look like there is going to be a pretty significant release of Arctic air, not only in North America, but over in Europe as well. A lot of the world's population will be affected by Arctic air over the next 7 to 10 days. Now, what will happen between now and Thursday, and this is especially true if you are along and east of the divide, we're going to have up and down temperatures as the Arctic waves that are coming through are kind of backwashing some of that cold air to the continental divide. And that's going to cause one day to be a little warmer, the next day to be a little bit colder, and a little bit of snow shower activity with those colder airs. But the bigger plunge of Arctic air comes at the end of the week and the weekend. It's very impressive, especially for the central, the south, and the eastern areas of the U.S. But it does appear that there's just enough westward movement of the Arctic air to push into the Rockies for at least a couple of days of severe cold. So stock growers and anybody with plans to be outdoors, we're actually going to have to go through a couple of days where it actually is going to feel like, well, winter with some severe cold. We don't expect the cold to lock in. It's not going to lock in. There will be a readjustment as we get into next week. But there's going to be an episode of Arctic air pushing further west. And boy, this is going to affect a lot of the nation. Over the course of the next week, you're going to hear on the news about severe cold getting into some deep south areas, snow and ice and all of those things. This is not a pattern that produces big snow because the air is of Arctic origin and high pressure is keeping the lid on any good Pacific moisture. So you're not going to get, at least in the central and western United States, a lot of precipitation with this Arctic wave. The cold is going to be the real story. Radar this morning does show we do have a patch of a little bit of light snow over portions of Colorado into western Kansas here. A little wave coming through. Some of you may have gotten dusted with a little bit of snow, especially along the Colorado Front Range. Lake effect snows elsewhere. Got to go back to late last week with that awful windstorm with that Arctic front. That Arctic front drove wind gusts of over 80 miles an hour. And the thing to remember about Arctic fronts, when the air with these gusty winds come through is cold, when the air is in the 20s or the teens instead of the 40s and 50s when these wind events happen, keep in mind the air molecules are more tightly packed together the colder the air is. So Arctic fronts have more force with them as they come through because of the higher air density when the air is colder. And you get scenes like here that we saw in Lusk. But we also had some clearing skies and beautiful scenes elsewhere across the Intermountain West with the high pressure and the fair skies. Beautiful clouds, some KH waves there yesterday morning along the Front Range. And, well, the elk are hanging out in New Mexico. Look at that elk herd down there. But even down in New Mexico, the cold air looks like it's going to be getting in, at least briefly. And finally, a little bit of ice on some water conditions there in the Lusk, Douglas area, and beautiful shots of cloud formations otherwise. And look at the geese. Which way are they going? Don't know here, but I think even the geese might know there's an Arctic wave that is headed our way. Nice shot of Split Rock there in central Wyoming. So here we are. I don't have a satellite for you this morning. The website that I grabbed those satellite photos is not functioning, but here we go. Couple of things to point out. There's the ridge along the west coast where it's been. I want you to pay attention to the axis of the Arctic air, the polar vortex. It's got an oval that has a north-south orientation. So when the Arctic air, the polar vortex that we've got there over the Hudson Bay area, your Arctic air is going to be aligned with that north-south. So the penetration of the Arctic air is more north-south here. That's why it's been going into the deep south. That's why there are many portions of Georgia that got not just a little bit of snow over the weekend, but it accumulated quite a bit in some areas. And you can see where the deep, cold Arctic air is going to be. We've got this little wave that's going to come down, and this is where we get the backwash. Along and east of the Continental Divide, you can see the colors here. You can see that the far western boundary with that red color right there is where the northerly flow and the colder air could come down on in, especially along and east of the divide, as the Arctic air mass right here isn't as deep, it's thinner because of the north-south axis of the polar vortex. And as we go and step through the days ahead, I want you to pay attention to this axis of the Arctic air, the polar vortex, and see how it changes as we get to the end of the week. So we start the week with the cold air pouring into the Great Lakes, the east, and the deep south. Severe clear in the Pacific Northwest and along the west coast. And the ridge axis is again right along the west coast. So we are going to look at temperature anomalies looking like this today. The heart of the cold going into the Great Lakes. We've got residual cold from the Arctic waves that came through over the weekend. And you can see backed up against the front range of Colorado here, some of that colder air. Some of that colder air getting into North Texas. But this is just kind of how we start the week. Tomorrow, you see the red pushing out a little bit here, so there's a little bit of a temperature anomaly as we get basically a little bit of a Chinook. So you can see the Chinook pushes all the way out in the Midwest. The cold kind of stays in the Great Lakes in the Northeast and the Southeast and the Deep South. But we get a little bit of a warm-up. But what we've got up north is a reloading. And as we take a look at what happens at the end of the week, by Wednesday, what do you notice? We no longer have a north-south axis. It's more now shifting east-west. So the polar vortex is basically circulating and wobbling a little bit, but it's taking on a different orientation. So what we're going to see is a push westward of the deeper Arctic air as we get into midweek. The high pressure ridge is still there, slightly more to the west. So the orientation has changed. We have a more west to east buildup of the Arctic air. And then we have one of the spokes in the wheel way up here near the Arctic Circle that's going to want to rotate around this. This will play a role here a little bit later. So there's a little bit of a backing, especially in Montana and the Dakotas, by midweek of that Arctic air. And there it is. This is by Thursday morning. So you can see the orientation now of that, generally speaking, west to east Arctic air mass that's developed across Canada and now creeping into the Dakotas. And you can see a little bit of cold air spills down along and east of the Continental Divide. So look what happens as we get past Thursday as things evolve. By Friday noon, there is just a slight more westward axis shift in the high pressure ridge, just enough. And we've got this next Arctic lobe right here, spoke in the wheel, that's going to head south. So what this will do is this is going to pull in at the surface. The Arctic air is going to really go into where I'm showing these arrows getting pointed as we get into late Thursday night, during the course of the day Friday, and into the weekend. This high pressure axis is just enough more west, but we're getting this high pressure axis attacked a bit by this upper trough off the Aleutians. That's going to keep this axis of high pressure from really going much further westward. But it's coming enough to the west that we're going to see the Arctic air really spill in. Look at these temperature anomalies by Friday morning. It's taking on that axis and it brings the Arctic air all the way, look at this, even into Washington State it leaks in. It is even leaking into areas of Idaho. What that means is the Arctic air is getting pushed far enough west, it's getting through the mountain gaps here and able to push all the way into British Columbia and parts of the Pacific Northwest. And it takes on this east-west shape like this. So by Friday morning, wherever you see the purple, the temperature anomaly is anywhere between 25, and it doesn't show this on the scale, but you can have anomalies as much as 40 to 50 degrees below the 30-year average. So this is the real deal right here with this Arctic air. Then as we get into Friday noon, so Friday morning, Friday noon, look at the rapidity of the Arctic air push. And we got a classic blue norther headed into Texas and Oklahoma here, going into eastern New Mexico all the way down to Roswell. And you can see where the bitter, bitter, bitter cold is going to be, which is going to be right there. But the purple is showing a significant push, and there's going to be an Arctic wave causing a lot of wind. We don't expect a lot of snow with this Arctic wave, but there'll be some because we don't have any good Pacific influence. But colder air is getting actually into western areas of Wyoming, into the Snake River Valley here. A little bit of it is able to get west of the divide. These are the temperatures by Friday morning's lows. Friday morning's lows are 30 below zero or more in North Dakota, northeastern South Dakota, and yes, finally even some sub-zero temperatures getting further westward in Montana and Wyoming and going into Nebraska here. These are the wind chill values by Friday. So by Friday morning, the Arctic wave is making itself shown minus 40 to minus 50 wind chills up here, and you're looking at a lot of cold coming on in, and there will be some light snow. By 5 p.m. Mountain Time on Friday, there's your Arctic air mass, and you can see a little bit of leakage is getting into west of the divide. Not a lot, but a little bit. We haven't seen that really all winter. Where you see the purple, you're looking at temperatures that are going to be single digits to below zero. Where you see the darker blue, you're looking at teens, and the greens, you're looking at temperatures that are going to be in the 20s. And this Arctic air mass, as it spills into the continental United States, is then going to be like molasses, kind of moving slow, but slowly moving eastward. This is by Saturday morning. So by Saturday morning, we could have some sub-zero temperatures or near or below zero temperatures there, and certainly the deepest of the cold will be going across the upper plain states in the Midwest. But look at the purple going all the way down into Oklahoma, North Texas here, and then you can't stop Arctic air. It's just dense, it's heavy, and it's going to spread out across the rest of the nation. There are your overnight low temperatures Saturday morning as predicted right now. So we'll just have to see, but I think the general trend has been that there is going to be a little push westward of this Arctic air. But by far the deepest, coldest Arctic air will again be in the nation's midsection. But livestock interest out here, do be prepared for much colder temperatures, and there are your wind chill values by Saturday morning, getting into areas along and east of the divide. By Sunday morning, the Arctic air is pushing south and east, and you can see a bit of a Chinook already develops in Montana and southern Canada in response to the Arctic air moving out. So that's why the Arctic air is not going to lock in. It's a glancing blow, but it's the biggest glancing blow we've seen this winter. And look at Texas by Sunday morning. Possible near or below zero temperatures in the Panhandle, across parts of Oklahoma, and we're getting into the lower 30s down into Houston and all the way down into the Gulf Coast. Here's the precipitation. As we mentioned, this is not the type of snow that's really heavy. And you can see where the Arctic influence is going to be right here. You're just not looking at anything really heavy. Great Lakes is a bit of an exception. But notice down into Arizona, New Mexico here, even Southern California, and then where the Arctic air hits higher humidity air, this makes sense, right? Coming up out of the Gulf, well, that's where you're going to get the heavier moisture. And take a look at this. Deep south snow is going to be a possibility with this Arctic wave as the Arctic air hits that Gulf moisture. Lighter snows will be found out here. Heavier moisture will lead to possibly snow down into New Mexico, Texas, Oklahoma, even far deep south into Arkansas, through the northern parts of North Carolina, Virginia, maybe even Washington, D.C. here. And then, as you could surmise, well, what happens here? An ice storm. Will it be that bad? Don't know, but boy, Texas is not going to be a fun place to be this weekend. Very, very cold temperatures, snow and ice. So we have, as the title of the podcast says, some Arctic mayhem. By Monday, okay, the next spoke in the wheel cuts off the head of the high pressure ridge. It's still there, but the high pressure ridge is not extending up here anymore. So what happens is we now have more Pacific influence coming in, so the Arctic air will work its way across the nation by early next week, and then the response to that will be some more milder air giving relief. But I'll tell you, the cold is going to be sticky. here in these parts of the country right here, well into the early portions of next week. And then we just have to wait and see what readjusts out here to what happens as we get to the end of January and into early February. Our regional travel forecast updated 3 p.m. each afternoon, Monday through Fridays. Have yourself a good Monday. We'll see you tomorrow.